Welcome! Today on Too Long Didn't Read Classics, we're going to take a look at the first modern novel, widely regarded as the most influential novel ever written, Don Quixote de la Mancha. Now, for those of you who only have 2 minutes and you really want to get this in quick, but you still want to know what it's all about, here's the Too Long Didn't Watch version of our Too Long Didn't Read review. Enjoy. Synopsis. Don Quixote, written by Miguel Cervantes in 1605. A strange, noble, deluded man becomes convinced he's a knight-errant. He rides across 17th century Spain in search of wrongs to right, with both comic and tragic consequences. Difficulty, moderate. Longish and can have archaic language. Use a modern English translation. Recommended for older teens and adults. Somewhat veiled references to prostitution and courtly love affairs. Not for children. Don Quixote. Don is a title of respect. It means he owned an estate. He was a gentleman. In a previous age, he would have been a knight. In this age, though, he's just a landowner. And not a very rich one either. He spends most of his money on books, when he gets money to spend. And as most of the books then published were books on chivalry, the romances, that's what he read. In fact, he became so obsessed with them that he got every single one that he could lay his hands on. It got to the point where he couldn't tell the difference between reality and the fictions that he was reading. He became convinced that these books, these outlandish tales of knights and princesses and dragons, of giants and enchanters, that they were all completely true, and that he ought to become a knight himself, and ride about, seeking honor and adventure, righting wrongs, and protecting the innocent. The problem with this is that he lives in late 1500s, early 1600s Spain. Knights are a thing of the past. They're long out of date by this point. The musket has rendered them obsolete. More than that, the example that he tried to follow as a knight was a complete fiction. These knights in his books that never needed to eat or sleep and could cut through giants with a single blow, they never existed. But for Don Quixote, everything he saw, everything he heard, it was all filtered through this fantasy world, and he refused to believe that it wasn't true, no matter how much reality tried to intrude. He sets out in the most ridiculous armor imaginable to find someone to dub him a knight, and his behavior and outfit causes chaos wherever he goes. Eventually, a harassed landlord, an innkeeper, dubs him in his courtyard just to get rid of him. This, of course, overjoys Don Quixote, and he sets out for home. He then convinces a farmer that lives near his estate, Sancho Panza, to be his squire, and together the two of them ride out to seek adventures. They encounter giants, armies, ghosts, and wizards, or from Sancho Panza's viewpoint, windmills, sheep, the Spanish Inquisition, and general misfortune. Needless to say, Don Quixote is much more impressed with his adventures than Sancho Panza is. In the second half of the book especially, there are a number of other stories woven in, secondary stories, some of which are famous in their own right. Stories like Anselmo and Lothario, and the story of Dorothea, Lucinda, Cardenio, and Don Fernando, and the story of the Turkish captive. These are all told during breaks in the travels, and these characters often become part of the main plot later on, during the process of which Don Quixote gathers around him one of the most mismatched groups of, not followers exactly, because most of them are there to protect Don Quixote from himself, and to minimize the damage to everyone else. Did you know Don Quixote has been the subject of at least 5 operas, 5 ballets, a Broadway musical, and a La Mancha, more than 22 films, and is referenced in countless books. What I liked about it, well, I've always liked the story. This is not my first time through it, and Don Quixote has been one of my heroes for a very long time now. Something about the mad old knight and his devotion to a hopeless cause, and the way he just never gives up, no matter what is thrown at him, and he gets a lot thrown at him during this book. It really resonates with me. I enjoy this book. The characters are fun and memorable, and they really feel like real people. You'll never forget Sancho Panza once you've read him. Between him constantly obsessing over that island that Don Quixote promised him, and his despair whenever he sees Don Quixote doing something insane, like the sheep. The image of him standing on that little bluff watching Don Quixote charge a flock of sheep because Don Quixote, thinks they're an army. The whole book is like that. It's a constant play off of Don Quixote's idealism, albeit through an insane filter, and Sancho Panza's realism, although rather money-loving and greedy. The two play off each other so well that it is a treat to read. I enjoy that. This book is as much an adventure story as it is a satire on the chivalric romances, and as an adventure story, it definitely stands up. For the most part, these adventures sound like they really could happen. Cervantes wrote in a realistic style, which was rather a breakthrough considering the novels of his day. The typical knightly romance, it left out everything unpleasant. All you had was the glorified moments, the knights, the battles, the tournaments, the castles, the palaces. It was spotless. Cervantes, he's mocking these books, and his knightly romance is far from spotless. You see every fly. There's hunger and pain and dirt. Don Quixote goes through so much abuse, but he never complains, and he never loses sight of what he's trying to accomplish, his goal, his dream. As impossible as it may be, and no, we're not playing that song again. What I didn't like. I really don't have a lot to complain of in this book. I really do like it. It starts to get a bit dry about 2/3 of the way through. I was reading it in an awful lot of hurry. I didn't have a lot of time to linger over it. So, that always hurts a good story. And I am reading it from the first English translation ever made of it, back in 1612. For reference, that'd be the same English as is used in the King James Version of the Bible. It's a bit archaic, and it made it a bit harder to slog through than the previous times when I've read it, when I borrowed it from the library and a more modern English translation. Which, of course, I do recommend if you're at all squeamish about long books. You might want to try picking up dare I say it, even an abridged version, possibly, where I really hate recommending abridged versions, but you might like it better that way. Who knows? I don't recommend abridged versions. I really don't. But in this case, if it gets you into the book, hey, it's worth it. The thing is that it can be a bit tough going through the original, and there are plenty of modern English translations out there, and plenty of adaptations and abridgments that you can get into without having to go through all 500 pages of the original in archaic English. So for what that's worth, this may be one of the very few times when I would recommend something like that hesitantly. One of the things that I didn't like about this book was the story of Lothario, and just the way that some of these other side stories seemed tacked on to the main story. I was reading it for Don Quixote. I didn't really want to hear about Cardenio and his lost love and the man who stole her from him, and so on and on. I wasn't really interested. And Lothario, of course, is a story about adultery, and I'll pass. I really don't want to. But in the end, they did add to the book. They did contribute something important to it. And part of it is that I just don't get all the references. Most of this book is sly jabs by Don Quixote at various books and cultural institutions of his time, not all of which I am familiar with. In fact, most of the books I am not familiar with because I can't find copies of them. Does that mean I can't enjoy the book? Absolutely not. This book has so much in it to offer. Even if you haven't read any of the books he's lampooning, the book stands on its own. This is one of those books that everyone should read. It's well worth it.